volume. Yep.
And I'll be an hour ahead of you up here.
There we go. All right.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Butler, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Secular Student Alliance of University to our event tonight. Made possible by the National Secular Student Alliance grant, which gave them. Our distinguished guest tonight is Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell, who is the Executive Director of the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Regional Science. She is the author of the OUT campaign, and we're really excited to have her tonight to speak on women in secularism. Would you please help me welcome Dr. Elizabeth Cornwell?
Thank you. So you can all hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about where's Eve, and in the last couple of years within the secular movement, there's been a lot of discussion about why aren't there more women involved, and we also find that women tend to more so than men be religious. So, you know, those of us who are non-believers often wonder why women are in fact religious when we know that religion has done them so much harm. We're aware of the fact that religion has been largely controlled by males, and women have not taken any real power within most churches, and that only recently have women stepped into clergy positions, and only in the most liberal of religious churches and synagogues. Religion is accused of oppressing women, and we see this today when we look at reproductive rights here in the US. The greatest opposition to allowing women to control their own bodies has been the religious right, the fundamentalists. So this control of women's reproduction, and men's as well, I mean, after all, it does usually take two to tango. The fact is, then, why would women subject themselves to religion when it seems to be not very good for them? And so controlling their sexuality and reproductive rights I think, has got a lot of women thinking now about what religion has done for them or against them. When in a Pew study, we find that more women are affiliated. 86% of women show some affiliation with religion compared to 79% of men. And in terms of actual belief in God or a universal spirit, we find 77% of women and 65% of men will have an absolute certain belief that there is a God or universal spirit. In terms of prayer, women 66%, men 49%. So we're looking at some pretty big differences here. In terms of an absolute certainty in a personal God, one who would answer your personal prayers, again we find this discrepancy between women and men of 58% versus 45%. So it is kind of curious that these differences exist, and we need to really look at why, because it's women who also tend to be the one that pass down religion to their offspring, the hand that rocks the cradle. So in asking why, sometimes the way we phrase the question is what's truly important. Now within the movement, there's been a lot of discussion, probably a lot. Some of you may be very familiar with some of the blogs and postings about women in secularism not feeling welcome, perhaps not feeling safe, perhaps there's reasons within the secular movement itself that cause women to stay away from the secular movement. However, that doesn't really necessarily explain why women tend to be more religious. But I mean, it is something to consider whether or not women feel welcome, or, and if they feel unwelcome, are we driving them to religion? We do tend to see that women seem underrepresented in terms of spokespeople. When we think about the four horsemen, so that was Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Dan Dennett. What most people don't know, we actually had scheduled Ayaan Hirsi Ali to be part of that discussion. And it was right at the time when she was having difficulty with her government and getting her security. And so she had to actually leave. The plan was, and we didn't term it the Four Horsemen until after we filmed it. Had she been part of it, it would have obviously not been called the Four Horsemen. We wouldn't have even gone in that route. But she was supposed to be part of the discussion, and unfortunately that didn't happen. But it is true, there are not that many women who we can think of up at the top of our heads in terms of famous atheists. We tend to grab, we look at Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. And that may be another reason why women don't identify so much with the secular movement. I don't know, it should be studied, but it's something to consider. Another one is whether or not the movement actually considers the needs of women. And there's been some discourse, well, are there differences between the needs of women and the needs of men? And that's kind of where I'm going to be going with this, because I don't think that the secular movement is actually addressing the real needs that women face. And so one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, can we learn from religion? Now, in evolutionary psychology and most science, but in evolutionary psychology in particular, we're taught early on to phrase the question in a way to not immediately come up with an answer, that you have to sometimes twist the question around. And so when we look at religion and we think, my gosh, it's oppressive to women, men control it, women lose their reproductive rights, they don't have power within most churches, synagogues, and mosques, and so on. Why in the world would women be attracted to that? Are they dumb? Are they, are they weak-willed? Are they just easier to and more gullible than men? Well, no, that's not the case. So the question is, in evolutionary biology, we always, if we look at a trait or behavior that is costly, the question becomes, well, what's the advantage? Because a costly trait, a costly behavior will be extinguished with evolution if the benefit does not outstrip the risks, the cost. And that's the question we need to be asking about religion. It's costly to women, and it's costly to men, but we're addressing women right now. What cost is being offset by what benefit? And can we learn from understanding what that benefit is? So one of the questions I ask is, in terms, are we overlooking some very basic things? Are we missing on fundamental premises that we can base why women are going to be more religious than men? And there, of course, is an irony of religion, as I just mentioned. And are we missing out on one of our heroes, or a few of our heroes, in understanding this irony? And I am going to suggest that we are, indeed, and we're missing, whoops, I went too far. Charles Darwin, and everybody knows about his theory of natural selection. Sexual selection becomes a little bit more, I think it's more interesting in many ways than natural selection per se. And I'm kind of old school. There are those, many people will say that sexual selection is just an aspect of natural selection, and that's fine. It really makes no difference. I'm sort of old school and always take sexual selection out a bit to get a better understanding of it. But what is interesting is, in terms of sexual selection and evolutionary theory, the two groups who most oppose it are as you might guess, the fundamentalists, the religious fundamentalists, but also it's the very liberal side of the equation. Liberals don't necessarily like evolutionary theory applied to humans. And we get a lot of flack from that. So I'm disliked by both sides of the equation, the very liberal and the very conservative. So anything I say will be used against me, so I'll go ahead and say what I want. So the other hero is Robert Trivers. Are any of you familiar with Robert Trivers? Robert Trivers, he's still around. He is probably one of the most important scientists who worked in evolutionary biology theories, and has come up with many theories. He's up there with Bill Hamilton and so on. And the one he came up with was parental investment theory. And that's what we're going to focus on, because parental investment theory has some pretty important impacts. And for example, when Darwin was looking at, well, let me go back to natural selection for a moment, just to make sure, a little refresher course for all of you. So, very simplistic, right? There's genes and mutations which Darwin recognized as individual differences. Heritability, you can pass it on to your children. The only thing you inherit from your children is insanity, so everything else gets passed down. And then reproductive success, out reproducing other individuals. The whole survival of the fittest thing, which is not something Darwin coined, is really a misinterpretation. What it really is reproductive success. That is central to natural selection. Now, sexual selection, Darwin used this to explain detrimental traits. Because if you think about it from natural selection, from his views on natural selection when he was proposing his theory, he talked about how traits should benefit the individual who's carrying it and allow that individual to cope better in his or her environment and then to succeed and produce more offspring. What really plagued Darwin was the peacock. And he actually said this in a letter to a friend. He said, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, it makes me sick." Because it was completely contrary to the basic theory of natural selection. He needed somehow to explain that. And what he did is Darwin's is brilliant. He realized that there had to be some benefit to this beautiful train. It certainly was not to escape predators. But what he noticed is that the peahens were much more attracted to the males with the beautiful tails than those that did not have beautiful tails. Now, in the case of peacocks and peahens, they are not a biparental care species. Only the female gives care. And that's an important thing for biologists to always understand when we look at behavior. Humans are biparental care species. That's an important thing to note, and I will bring that up again in a minute, but keep that in the back of your mind. So, again, another beautiful peacock. And studies since Darwin have actually gone in, and this does sound kind of cruel. They go in, it doesn't hurt the peacock, at least physically. They go in and they'll clip out the eyes, various places. And when they do that, and peahens have so the way the experiment works, you got a peacock on one side and another peacock on the other side in a cage. And only the peahen can fit through, because they're smaller, can fit through the little doors to either peacock. And so one peacock maintains his beautiful tail. In fact, they even have done so much as enhance it by making it even bigger and more ridiculous. And the other poor guy, they go in and clip his little tail away. And the female always goes to to the male with a beautiful tail. And as we've looked at the theory of sexual selection and these traits that seem to be bad, there are various ways of looking at it. Is it signaling something? Is it a good genes trait? For example, in some species, males that are very colorful cannot be colorful if their immune systems are compromised, if they have too many bugs eating away at them, if they look mangy. I mean, think about it. When you look at something mangy, you don't want to be around that. So they look diseased. So they don't look quite as beautiful, and their colors are not quite as strong. And we know that testosterone is a hormone that can affect color and achieves greater brightness in males. But it also compromises the immune system. Testosterone is very hard on the body. That's why males tend to die younger than females. It's a very bad substance. It should be banned. But and in many animals, they only heighten the testosterone levels during the season. But of course, humans don't have seasons. So men cycle daily. You know, they complain about women cycling monthly. They happen to cycle daily. So their testosterone levels go up. Guess what time? Guess when their testosterone levels are up compared to down? Morning. Yeah, she got it.
Oh.
I won't say. So let's get back to humans. They're a biparental care species. That means they both care about their offspring, and they both spend a lot of time. Many of you here, I know there's some older students, but many of you here may have remembered your parents caring for you well into your 20s. Lately, it seems like more and more, or well into their 30s before they get out of the house, but we invest a lot of time. So this little joke here, I'll read it to you, so in case you can't read it. Yes, I realize that we are free agents, but I have to take on the additional risk of pregnancy and am more susceptible to certain sexually transmitted diseases, so I think you should pay for the movie. This is sort of a joke on parental investment theory. Now, even though women, and we're going to talk only about human animals now, primates, the thing about women, even though we are a biparental care species, and most times men invest heavily in their offspring just like women, still women bear that initial risk. What we see is, when it comes down to it, that individual who bears the greatest reproductive cost will be the choosiest in mating. Now that's across the animal species, and that's going to be with humans. You're going to find when it comes to long-term mating that they're both going to be extraordinarily choosy. But when it comes to short-term relationships where men might take off after impregnating a woman, men will be less choosy and women will be actually choosier because they, but I won't get into that. If you want to ask me why that is later, I'll tell you. And the least investing individual must display superior qualities. Now, I said we weren't going to talk about other animals. We were just going to talk about humans. But let me digress for a moment. So that peacock with the beautiful tail doesn't invest anything but sperm into the offspring. His great cost is the tail, so he has the most opportunity to mate, and he has multiple mates. In fact, when we look at these types of arrangements where the male doesn't invest, we usually find in herds, we find one male that tracks that has the harem, and most of the males go without any mate at all. And that's not uncommon. In humans, though, we do tend, for the most part, to mate with, we have one mate for a period of time, and we invest in the offspring, both parents. rams. This is a Rocky Mountain horned sheep. They live near where I did in Colorado. And they, you've probably seen the scenes where these rams just go at it, hitting head to head. But what isn't interesting, I'll do a little aside because it's kind of funny. They have these great big herds of females, and they guard the best areas to eat. But there's what are called satellite males that hang out around. Because one, it's safer to be around a herd than to be off on your own anyway. But what happened, we're talking a big piece of property here, and this big guy might be over on one side and spread out all the females, and then one of these satellite males might take advantage of this. And they do, and a female will kind of maybe wander off a little bit, and he will go and what's amazing is these guys can actually run and copulate behind the female and impregnate her, which is pretty impressive, I actually do think. So that's right. So forgive me for digressing for a moment, but I always have to, it's like, wow, that's impressive, guys. So anyway, so as I mentioned, conception is more costly to women. We're back to humans now. 9 months of gestation, and then infant care, and then whatever comes after that. And then men, ultimately, the absolute bare minimum requirement is sperm is cheap. How many of you remember that movie? Oh, good. Okay. I'm feeling old when nobody remembers my movie references. So the conundrum then for women, and we're talking about our evolutionary past as humans were living in Africa in small tribal communities. Men are stronger, they're more aggressive because of the testosterone, and more violent. That's fairly true. And men will have stronger preferences for multiple short-term partners, more so than women. And I know that's not the most PC thing to say, but one of the ways we can know that men and women have these differences besides just testing is we look at them physically. When we look at other species where males have multiple mates, the bigger the harem, the more they have to defend, the larger the difference between the size of the male and the female. When they mate for life and both care for the offspring like swans or gibbons or penguins, they may not, well anyway, or at least seasonally mate and care for the offspring, it's really hard for us humans to tell them apart. Size-wise, they're about the same, males and females. Now overall, even though there are obviously women who are taller than men and men who are, and so on, but overall we find that men in general, on average, are taller than women. And that's one sign that men and women traditionally, from our hominid past and into our early ancestral, as well as behaviorally, we know there are still cultures that have harems, that men would have had multiple mates. Now in hunter-gatherer societies, at most, that probably would have been 2 women. And often they would have been sisters. And if you want to ask questions about that, there are actually some very interesting benefits as to why sisters would want to share the same husband. So to navigate through these dangers shaped women in terms of social intelligence. And women tend to be better at social intelligence than men in many ways. And they've had to kind of do this in a very, in a way that doesn't threaten their partner. Again, they can be harmed. Remember, they can be harmed by men. And one way to do it is women bonding with other women, developing safety networks for themselves and for their offspring. there would have been their extended family, they would have been their friends. And I don't know how often you've seen this, but often when couples go out together, if they're not newly in love, because we don't even want to think about them for a minute because they're just insane. But when you see couples go out together, what do you usually end up seeing? The two guys are talking together, and the two women are talking together, and they're walking along, right? It just seems to, and if you start observing that, it's really interesting. It's kind of an interesting thing to watch. It's a natural phenomenon for men and women to bond with members of their own sex, and there's some very good evolutionary reasons why you want to do that. For the men, it was because if you went into battle, you wanted to have those guys who were with you, who are hanging with you in battle, to also be, your buddy. So you wanted them to have your back. And then, so the adaptive solutions for women were develop superior communication skills, verbal fluency, women tend to be better at that overall, ability to read facial emotions and body posturing. Women get a little irritated sometimes with men when we say, well, she had that look, right? And didn't you see that? No. Okay, so greater ability to remember wrongs. We keep score. I love lecturing to older couples because they all get it. And those who are younger may not get this yet, but really, women do, and this has been studied. This is not just anecdotal. This has been studied. Women keep scores. They're the one, after 30 years of marriage, they're the one that's going to say, remember that night you forgot to take out the trash, and I had to go out there, and I tripped, and I broke my ankle? Remember that? Sorry, ladies. We tend to, we do that. And then we're very keen on commitment cues from men. And our friends, and our female friends as well. But commitment cues are really important to women. And this is probably one of the greatest tensions between men and women, because men don't necessarily need those high commitment cues. So our ancestral legacy, we have superior social navigators, more nurturing, more physically vulnerable, enormous cost of social marginalization, high cost of offspring, current environment, economic independence, we have education, political power, no longer family dependent, and reproductive control for the moment. Now, religion benefits control of men by other men. So when men misbehave and treat their spouses or their children badly, who can step in? Other men. Also, they have to respond to a higher authority. Where that higher authority actually ends up, depends on the religion and depends on the hierarchy of the religious order. Also, religion tends to be family-centered. Again, creating that social context that men are going to be, they're going to be good dads. They're going to be influenced to do that. And protection of women and children. There's a natural social net. And then control of the womb. These are Buddhist nuns, and of course, the rest you probably recognize. Women are kept in confines. That's kind of the other extreme of it. That's the part that those of us who are non-religious go, I don't get it. Why would women subject themselves to that? But again, flipping the question around is what we need to do. But men are also, subjecting themselves to obeying religious orders as well. So they don't get off scot-free. It's not like a big cabal of men deciding, hey, let's go oppress women. I mean, that's just not how it's being done. But it works. It works. And because it worked, it survived. Religion has survived because it works, because it plays into these very basic evolutionary differences between men and women and what we want. Men want to control the womb because they don't want to raise somebody else's kid. Women always know whose kid it is, right? You don't have to, the kid doesn't have to look like her mom to know that it's that woman's kid. So these benefits that religion presents are social welfare, reliability, predictability, and often it's free. Churches today will often, especially in poorer areas, offer free childcare. If you're a poor woman, especially one on your own, you need to work, you can get free childcare. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to the church. It offers fictive kin, again, for people coming in from other parts of, other parts. Their family's no longer with them. There's no one close by. The way we go around the world now and set up into new community, church immediately creates fictive kin. And then, of course, it forms community. And food, shelter, daycare, all of those definite social identity, extended family. And then faith-based, this was said by Mitt Romney. Well, we don't need faith-based institutions other than when they're performing a non-faith role. We don't fund it. And then he said, and some of the faith-based institutions, particularly in the inner city, are doing a lot better job helping the poor, helping the kids, helping families get on their feet than some government social services agencies. So helping them in their secular role is, of course, fine. And this is an attitude we see around the United States, because the government is not going to step in. So let's look at what happens in countries where there is, indeed, a secular social network. Estonia, religion is 16% important, 17% in Sweden, Denmark is 19%, and then 27% in Britain. These nations all have very strong social support. High taxes, but Bangladesh, 99%, Nigeria, 99%, Yemen, 99%, United States, 65%. And again, we do have social networks, but we rely a lot on volunteerism. In fact, volunteerism in the United States is extraordinarily high. We like to think of that as a good thing, and it is. But we need to think about what the cost is of that. So with the faith-based initiatives, we're moving away from secular support to religious support. So we're making it stronger. And so the question then is, what can we do? And it's a big list, right? I mean, I've given you kind of an idea of what religion, but creating strong social networks, secular activities bringing people together, families together, and I'm talking about families and women and community. Support for women and children. One of the things the Richard Dawkins Foundation has been implementing is at national conferences, we offer childcare for a very, very, like $10. And the only reason we charge even $10 is just to assure people will sign up and bring their kids. It's a kind of a psychological thing that we have to do. And then political activism on the issues of women and children. I think we are drawing women into the movement because of the recent risk towards our reproductive. Right, so I know I was running out of time, and I was getting hand signals. Yes, before I have to try. So thank you, and I wanted to special thanks to Ben and to Elizabeth for all their help and for inviting me. And anyway, and if you have questions, I don't know, do we have time for a few questions? Okay. So does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
My family.
Oh.
So would that idea of the volunteerism, be a reason why the right wing, which tends to be more religious, is anti-socialism?
I think that's too easy of a. I think that's probably not directly related. I don't think they sit there and go.
Or is it not conscious that way?
I think it's not conscious. I think there's some. We are a nation that has built on volunteerism. From very early on. When I lived in Britain, trying to volunteer for an organization is difficult. It was amazing. I was just trying to volunteer at the local pound, shelter, animal shelter, and they wanted like background checks, and here I am. I'm studying children at the university, and I've got it was very bizarre. And I thought, well, this is discouraging. But when in the U.S., we raise more money than any other country. We donate more than any other country. We are active. So it's part of our nationality. And I would hate to see that go, because I think it is truly important part of helping your neighbors, and we don't have to constantly, I don't believe in constantly having to rely on your government, that getting people to help is a good thing. It makes people feel good about themselves and about their community. I do think that there are probably some people within the fundamentalist movement who recognize this, who really do recognize this for what it is. And I don't think most of the people who are religious recognize this as, and I don't think most secularists even recognize this. In fact, I had heard talks before about how all these countries that are like with low crime rates like Sweden and Norway and all that, it's because they're mostly atheists. I said, no, you can't take that kind of cause and effect. Let's look at what's really going on. They don't need religion. And as I said, especially in poor communities, and I live in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm in DC quite often, and I was driving through a part of DC that's mostly black, and on the side of this big church was free daycare. And I thought, yeah, that's where I'd go. And I talked to a couple of friends of mine, and they had said that they would take, during the summer, they take their kids to all these Bible camps and things because they're really cheap, and the kids aren't in school, and there's nowhere else to take them. And after daycare, after school care, we're cutting a lot of stuff out of the activities after school that I used to enjoy when I was a young girl, which is a real long time ago. And the fact is, what's stepping into it are some very well-meaning people who are religious, but there's also the Good News. Have anybody read the Good News Club? Yeah. So I mean, that's just scary, right? So if those of you who haven't, please read it, because it's frightening. And secularists need to step up to the plate, and it's not that we should go teach atheism after school. That's not what I'm talking about. It's going in and having chess or games, or I guess they don't allow dodgeball anymore. I mean, just something that's just purely secular, right? I mean, you don't have to spell secular out. You just make it secular. Think about all the things that we do that are in fact secular. And I grew up in California, in Los Angeles, and religion was just not an issue. I mean, I remember we had the Christmas pageant, and we did the dreidel, dreidel, dreidel song for the 5 Jews in the class, and that was it, and nobody cared, and nobody asked questions, and there were some kids that trotted off to catechism, and other kids that didn't, and so on. But most of the school activities, they were all after school. They were all secular. There were no churches coming in. They didn't feel that was what they should be doing. I mean, the change in how fundamentalists and evangelicals have changed the way they recruit is quite amazing when you go through the history of it, and you go through how they become much more in the public sector and much more involved in politics. I mean, it used to be considered, that was of the other world, and we don't do those kind of things. But yeah, it's interesting. So, yeah.
So given that, taking what you just said, the fact, studying how they've become more political and how they've become a larger segment of society, what can we learn from that? How can we take that and run with it?
I would say study whatever you can on the Christian right. Read the books that they've written and how to organize, and that's what we need to do. I mean, it really is. We really need to be smart. When the Christian right first, how old was I? I mean, I was young. I was probably in my early 20s, and I started seeing the Christian right becoming involved in school boards. I tell my friends, I said, this is bad. These people shouldn't be on school boards. And this is in California, and most of the people I hung with were engineers and computer scientists and physicists and things. And they were like, stop worrying, those people are crazy. Just leave them alone, they'll go away. Well, no, they didn't. And they thought I was Chicken Little. And what they did is they went from school board, and then they got into the city government, and from the city government they started getting into the state government, and in the state government they started getting into national, and then they couldn't be ignored anymore. And so Jimmy Carter was, he ran and brought in a lot of Baptists. Well, that didn't work out so well for them. But so the Republican Party said, well, we'll give it a shot. And then the Republican Party, probably thinking the same thing my friends were thinking, oh, those people are crazy, but hey, we can get their votes. Bring them on in. Come to our tent. And then pretty much they were taken over. I think finally people are fighting back within the Republican Party. I think enough people have left the Republican Party that, or just not, it used to be the Republican Party, they were conservative, but they weren't socially nutty. They did things like start the arts and sciences. They were in support of Sesame Street. They were in support of PBS. They were in support of science education. They were really strongly in support of science education because it meant a strong nation, right? Strong defense. And so this change that swept through the Republican Party kind of came at them probably as surprisingly as anybody else. And so then they got this big voice. And we need to do the same thing. We need to do the exact same thing. And it's going to take a while, and we have to be patient about it. And we have to not just sit there and moan and groan and say, oh, there's nothing we can do. Yeah, they have tons of money, but we're smart. We can figure these things out and work with groups who align with us. And that may also be other religious groups. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, not Freedom from Religion.
Americans United.
Yes, thank you. Americans United for Church and State. They include religious organizations. They're quite active. And so we have a lot of allies in this. Secularism does not necessarily mean atheism. And it's just something, we have to just do the work. And we're trying, the Richard Dawkins Foundation is trying to do some organizing. Sean Faircloth is the one who's kind of leading that charge. And in terms of trying to do some more political activism and getting people to express their voice. And because there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us. And we just need to be louder and smarter than we've been. Any other questions? Yes.
I've been in the pro-choice movement for well over 40 years. And I've noticed a difference now from 40 years ago. The crazy presentations of candidates and leaders on the abortion issue includes no exemption for rape or incest or the health of the woman. And that wasn't the case 40 years ago. And you have these people standing and taking that position, and I'm thinking the women should rise as one.
Yeah.
And say that these people can't be elected. They've simply not responsible vision for how we're going to conduct our society. But the women aren't there.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that it is upsetting. Although I do think a lot of women quietly didn't vote, were just busy, and so they didn't go against their what their community wanted them to do. It'd be really interesting to try to find that out. I'm just making a little guess, but I think a lot of women are quietly opposing, but we need women who are really loudly opposing it. Yeah, go ahead.
Piggybacking on that, I don't know that it was so silent, particularly this last election cycle. I have neighbors that I know what their husbands' views are, but I know these women went in to ballot and did what they knew was right.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So that, it's that kind of thing. And then, just didn't say anything. Oh, yeah, I voted. Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. And I hope women start making a voice. And I hope women in secularism start making a voice about what it is they really need. And there have been some people who say, well, there's no difference between men and women, so what's the big deal? But there are these basic differences. Women are the ones that are going to be caretaking, and these are the responsibilities that women are going to have. It doesn't, it may not, we got to stop with the PC thing, so much that we stumble over ourselves. Women are much more likely to take care of the children than men. That doesn't mean that men don't love their children as much or aren't capable. It just means we have these very basic biological differences. And yeah, go ahead.
But I mean, that really only applies to adults and parents. I mean, young women, I've been wondering myself what's drawing them in so much. I mean, it's got to be just the social aspect. I'm assuming the need to fit in.
Well,
Women are like
and
that. Like, we want to be accepted. We want to be liked. We want to feel like we're a part of something. I mean, I heard you talking a lot about the whole, parental portion of it. But there's like a lot of the younger generation that's being sucked in. Like,
Yeah.
super young.
well, again, it's a sense of community, and it's where you're going to find a committed male. Remember I said one of the things that religion can do is control males, and they make males obedient to the higher authority. And so you go into a pool, a mating pool, and you now have access to men who you're thinking of, oh, okay, they follow this line of thought. They think like me. I don't have to, hang out in bars and all that stuff, and or go to eHarmony or whatever it is. So anyway, I mean that's another reason for young people, and especially college-age kids, especially for those who are just moving out and away from home for the first time. That social network of the church, and most big universities will have 10, 15 religious-based organization, one secular organization, right? And it's because they offer, they offer family, and often families of the church will invite these kids over for dinner. They'll have, they make them feel at home when they're away from mom and dad for the first time, and that's, that's a nice, comfy feeling, because it's scary when you first move away from home when you're young. I thought it was a great adventure, but I'm sort of don't fall in that norm. And probably most of you are the same way. That's another part about, some of the atheism, secular movement. We tend to be outliers in one direction or another. But anyway, yeah.
I was just curious on your thoughts and feelings about the latest going-ons with the Muslim women, how they've come back and talked about how we don't need anyone to stand up for us, that we can take care of ourselves, we don't need anyone to say what we can and can't wear, freedoms and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, why do they buy into it, hook, line, and sinker? And not all do. I mean, some leave, but it's costly. I mean, some women are killed for it. It's like anything else. I mean, if your whole family's invested in that. That's your whole belief system. And I don't know if I could easily give up my whole belief system if it meant losing everything. If it meant losing my family, I mean, I didn't have to go through that. And I know there have been atheists I've talked to who have gone through something similar, but they didn't lose their entire community. They may have lost, they may have been shunned by their family, but they can still slip in and out of the community and establish a new community. And that's not true for Muslim women. They're isolated. And that's one of the things when I was showing the picture of the women in the burqas and the I can't even think, the other religious group. I mean, they're very, very isolated, and that it's when you're that isolated, the thought of an outside, of going to the outside doesn't even seem possible. And I read a really interesting book just recently, just finished it, by it's by the gal who left Scientology, who is the niece of Miss Cavey, She was basically raised in Scientology, and she talks about how, her thoughts and feelings when she was young, and she had no idea of this outside world, that what was going on. She was so insulated in this very bizarre world of Scientology. I highly recommend the book. It's she gets a little long-winded, like I do, and but it's really, anybody who's interested in trying to understand the grasp that religion can have on the brain and what it can do, I would recommend reading this book, just because I think it gives an insight, especially for a psychology major, it gives a real insight into the power that religion has in the first place, but the power of religion given its isolation, when the members are isolated. And they know that if they leave, they will be completely shunned from their family. Or, in the case of Scientology, locked away in some terrible conditions and made to do some terrible things. I mean, it really is criminal, and that it goes on here is quite fascinating. But understanding that power is critical to understanding why Muslim women, I think, will always, basically stand up and say, I've had enough. I mean, I haven't, this is, you guys stay out of our business, this is our life and we can handle it. But there are plenty of women who have left and do say enough is enough, and yeah.
A lot of this stuff we've heard from you tonight is a very good explanation for why some people, even though they may not fully believe or they may stop believing, hide that and stay in the religion.
Yeah.
Because the cost of all these things, giving up all these things, is just too great. But there's also, for the true believers,
Mm-hmm.
I used to be one, I'm ashamed to say, but I've got to
Yeah, that's right.
my shame to at least to admit it. But when I was a true believer and going to being an atheist, one of the things I didn't even think about until it hit me was not just the social support I was giving up, but all of my relatives.
Yeah.
Not the living ones, none of my living
Oh,
relatives.
yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Dead ones.
The dead
All of a
ones,
sudden,
they're,
I would never see my grandfather again.
right.
I would never see my uncles that had passed.
Yeah, and I know.
It was really rough on me.
Yeah, I know that when Andy Thompson was here, he probably touched on that. I don't know if you got to see his talk, but he has a book called Why We Believe in Gods, and one of his premises is how do you handle death? I mean, humans understand death, unlike most other animals. Other animals may be aware when something's dead, and they may have some cognizant, but there's no real, probably in-depth understanding. And yeah, it's a real tricky subject, and I've had people ask me, I'm sure some of you have been asked when people find out you're an atheist, well, what do you think happens to you after you're dead, and what do you tell kids? And I say, well, what I've told my niece is that we started out as stardust and we end as stardust, and you're made of stardust, and you're just going to be becoming star. And isn't it wonderful that at this moment in time, these particular stardust came together and were together? And you can make it quite a beautiful thing. And yes, having lost people I love dearly is hard. And I remember when my brother was dying in 1988, he was hemophiliac and then contracted AIDS. And I remember having this urge to pray, to want to ask somebody for help, and I knew I couldn't, right? And it was, but that there was still that powerful influence from my Catholicism of, wanting to beg someone for help, and I don't think that's an unusual thing for people to want to ask for help, and that sense of helplessness, I think, has a huge effect on people not leaving religion, if not more so than even losing, as you said, relatives. That sense of there's nobody up there to make to justify everything. And I think being an atheist, at least for me, there's a sense of responsibility that when people have bad things happen to them, there's no God that's going to make it all right when they get to heaven. I mean, there's a song I like, and it's being poor. One of the verses is being poor is a good way to get into heaven, and because the meaning being that when you're that kind of poor and there's no hope of really getting out of it, there is that hope at the end that I will be living in that beautiful mansion. I will be close to God, and I can imagine why a lot of people would want to believe that. People who feel hopeless poverty and hopeless lives, that would be a hard thing to give up if you weren't giving it up for atheism and not seeing your family, or not thinking that someone who was in pain all his life is suddenly without pain and could do things, enjoy life without pain. And unfortunately, the truth isn't always pretty, and I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand. Why, and that's why they think we're always so sad. That atheists are just sad, nihilistic people, and we're not, because it's like, okay, this is it. This is all we got.
Just when we talk to them that we're sad.
Yeah, maybe. Because I'm thinking, how many Sundays you could have been doing something fun instead of going to church? Did you really want to spend eternity going to church every day, 24/7? Do you really want to do that for eternity? That's a long time. Yeah. Let me go to that. Yeah, hell has the much better company. I know a lot of people there. Anyway, so any other questions, or we?
I was actually thinking for your club, if everybody would kind of glom together and do a group photo with Dr. Cornwell, if we have like 2 minutes to do that. It'd be great for the Secularist.
Oh, sure, great.
I know. I'm a teacher. I'm bossy. All right. Come on. Huddle up. I think if we all come forward and kind of face that way, or
You want us on the
what will the angle work?
on the stage or on the stage?
What's in the angle better? So.
I know. Don't fall.
Let's not kill our guests
No.
in the meantime. So, and we kind of come forward up here, and we'll kind of